Maria's heart raced as she stood in the airport terminal, eyes darting between the bustling crowds and the sleek, polished doors ahead. She wasn't supposed to be here, at least, not like this. Not standing on the cold tile, eyes fixed on the glowing first-class lounge sign. She wasn't one of them. Never had been. She pulled her coat tighter, trying to shield herself from the chill, though the discomfort was nothing compared to the whirlwind of emotions inside her chest. Today was supposed to be the culmination of everything she had worked for, the moment that would finally prove to the world that she had a place at the table. But instead, she stood on the outside looking in. Maria had spent years climbing, fighting for the opportunity to stand where she was today. From a small-town girl to a woman with a resume that screamed potential, she had earned this moment, this meeting with the company's CEO, who could change the trajectory of her entire life. She glanced at her watch. The meeting was in an hour. The flight had been delayed, leaving her with extra time. But instead of feeling relieved, she felt a sinking sense of dread settle in her stomach. The more time passed, the more she realized she was growing unsure of herself. Was she truly worthy of the success she was chasing? In front of her, the doors of the first-class lounge opened with a soft whoosh, and a man in a crisp suit walked out, his nose high in the air, his expensive watch catching the light. He didn't even look at her, his eyes fixed ahead as he moved past. She couldn't help but notice how effortlessly confident he seemed, as if the world bent to his will, simply because of what he wore. Maria tugged at the hem of her jacket, feeling the weight of her own self-doubt pressing harder against her. She didn't belong here. Not in this world of expensive suits, designer handbags, and gold-rimmed glasses. Not among people who seemed to carry an air of entitlement as though they were born with the world at their feet. She wasn't one of them. She never had been. The security guard at the door barely glanced her way. "Sorry, miss," he said curtly, his eyes scanning the lobby. "First class only." Maria's face flushed. The words stung more than she expected. She had hoped she would blend in, slip past unnoticed, but this guard's dismissive attitude was a harsh reminder of the gulf between her and the world she was trying to enter. She swallowed her pride, forcing a polite smile. "I have a meeting with Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice steady despite the nervous tremor in her stomach. The guard didn't even flinch. "Can't let you in without clearance, miss. Not without a first-class ticket." He gestured toward the elegant lounge behind him. The words echoed in her ears. Not without a first-class ticket. It wasn't that she was angry. She had expected some kind of obstacle. But the way he said it, like she didn't even have the right to stand in front of the door, was what bothered her. Maria stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. She wasn't about to walk away. Not now, not when everything she'd worked for had led to this single moment. She needed to meet with the CEO. She had no other option. The minutes passed slowly as she waited, her eyes locked on the lounge doors, watching the rich and powerful glide in and out without a second thought. She had heard stories of people like her, ordinary people, being dismissed like this all the time. Her whole life had been a series of moments like this one. Moments where she had been overlooked, underestimated, or ignored. But not today. Today would be different. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, jolting her from her thoughts. A quick glance at the screen revealed a text message from her sister, "You'll do great. I believe in you." Maria smiled briefly, then wiped away the tear that threatened to fall. Her sister, her only family, had always believed in her, even when Maria didn't believe in herself. She tightened her grip on the strap of her purse and straightened her back, trying to shake off the uncertainty that was starting to creep in. She couldn't afford to be weak. Not now. Taking a deep breath, she walked toward the lounge, eyes fixed on the door, determined not to let the guard stop her again. The security guard shifted on his feet as she approached. "I told you already, miss," he said, his tone hardening. "You can't go in." Maria stopped a few steps away, giving him a long, steady look. She wasn't going to back down. Not this time. Not when she had everything to lose. "I'm here to meet Mr. Thompson," she said again, this time with more confidence in her voice. "I have an appointment with him." The guard raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "An appointment?" he repeated, his eyes narrowing. "Who are you?" Maria hesitated. The words were on the tip of her tongue, but for a brief moment, doubt made her question herself. She wasn't a big shot. She wasn't anyone important. But she had come this far. She had fought for this moment, and she wouldn't let it slip away just because someone thought she didn't belong. "Yes," she said, her voice firm, "I'm meeting with him." The security guard looked her up and down, taking in her worn jacket, her simple shoes, and the purse that had definitely seen better days. There was no denying it, she didn't fit the image of someone who was about to meet a powerful CEO. He turned to look inside the lounge, as if weighing his options. She knew the game. The game where people like her were always on the outside, never allowed to cross the threshold. She wasn't playing that game anymore. Before he could say anything else, she took a step forward, pushing past him toward the door. The guard reached out to stop her, but Maria was faster. She held her breath as she pressed her hand against the cold glass, sliding it open just enough to slip inside. She didn't know if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life or if she had just taken the first step toward her future. She didn't care. Her eyes scanned the room, looking for him, Mr. Thompson. The CEO. The man who could change everything. At first, she didn't see him. The lounge was filled with the hum of quiet conversation, the clink of coffee cups, and the soft rustle of papers. It was everything she had imagined, a world of smooth surfaces, where power and money met in hushed tones. Then, her gaze landed on him. He was sitting at a table in the far corner, surrounded by several people. They were all deep in conversation, but Maria could tell he was the center of attention. His demeanor was confident, almost to the point of arrogance, and his sharp, tailored suit screamed wealth. For a moment, she froze. Doubt crashed over her like a wave. How could she just walk up to him? How could someone like her even get his attention? But she had come this far. She had to do this. Taking a deep breath, she walked toward him, her steps careful but purposeful. The closer she got, the more nervous she became. What if he didn't remember the meeting? What if he dismissed her just like everyone else had? As she neared his table, the conversation around him died down. It was as if, without warning, everyone sensed her presence. The CEO turned toward her, his gaze sharp. She felt the weight of his eyes on her, curious, assessing. "You're..." He raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised. He had expected someone else. Before Maria could answer, she heard footsteps behind her. The security guard. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, his voice cold and authoritative. Maria's heart raced. There was no turning back now. The CEO, still looking at her, spoke slowly, his voice cool but not unfriendly. "Let her speak," he said. Maria met his eyes, then took a step forward, ready to speak her truth. And that's when she saw it. The recognition. In his eyes, the faintest flicker. It was barely there, but it was enough to send a shiver down her spine. Something was off. Was he surprised? Did he know her? Or had something else happened that she hadn't seen coming? The seconds stretched into eternity. Maria's pulse raced. She had no idea what was about to happen, but she knew one thing for sure: this was just the beginning. The mystery of this moment? It was about to unfold. And everything would change. Maria's breath caught in her throat. The CEO's eyes lingered on her, and she couldn't quite place the look in them. Was it recognition? Skepticism? Or was it something deeper, something she couldn't quite understand? The silence between them felt thick, almost suffocating. For a moment, she didn't know whether to speak, to stand there and let the tension dissolve, or to turn and run. The security guard stood behind her, his arms crossed, still keeping a close eye on her. The CEO, however, didn't seem to be bothered by her presence. "Who are you?" Mr. Thompson's voice was calm but sharp, his tone carrying an edge she couldn't quite read. Maria forced herself to swallow the lump in her throat. This was it. This was the moment she had worked so hard for. The moment she had dreamt of since she had decided that she belonged in this world. She was not going to let it slip away. "My name is Maria Jensen," she said, her voice steady but with a hint of nervousness she couldn't shake. "I'm here to meet with you." The CEO tilted his head slightly, his gaze not leaving her face. His eyes narrowed ever so slightly, as if weighing her words carefully. There was a moment of stillness, before he nodded toward the empty seat across from him. "Sit down," he said simply. Maria hesitated for a split second. Should she sit? Was it the right thing to do? But her legs moved before her brain could fully process the decision. She took the seat, her body trembling slightly as she crossed her arms in her lap, trying to conceal her unease. The CEO remained silent for a few moments, staring at her with an almost calculating look. He didn't ask about her background, or how she'd managed to bypass security. He didn't say anything about the fact that she wasn't dressed in the typical attire of someone who would normally sit at this table. Instead, he just studied her. For the first time, Maria felt the weight of his gaze in a way she couldn't describe. It was like he was looking right through her, as if he could see every fear, every insecurity, every question she had about whether she truly belonged here. She fought the urge to shift in her seat. She couldn't afford to look weak. "Not now. I'm not sure what you're expecting from me," he said after a long pause, his voice deep and steady. "But you've interrupted a meeting, and I don't take kindly to that." Maria's mind raced. She couldn't back down now. She had come too far. She had something important to say, something that might just change everything for her. But the pressure in the room, the pressure of being in this high-stakes environment, was overwhelming. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I know this isn't the right way to approach you, but I have an idea. A business proposal. One that I believe could be mutually beneficial." He raised an eyebrow. "A business proposal?" There was disbelief in his voice, but there was also a flicker of something else. Curiosity, maybe. "And why would you think I'd be interested?" Maria could feel the heat rising in her face. She wasn't sure why she'd chosen to come here, to approach him like this, but it had been the only option. She had to believe in herself. This was her moment. If she didn't take the chance now, when would she ever get another? "Because I know how you operate," she said, her voice growing a little more confident. "I know what you're looking for. Innovation. Efficiency. Something different, something that stands out." The CEO didn't respond immediately. He just stared at her, as if weighing her words against his own thoughts. Maria tried to remain calm, but her heart was pounding in her chest. She couldn't afford to blow this. "Tell me more," he finally said, his voice a bit more measured now, as though he had shifted from skepticism to curiosity. Maria exhaled slowly. She had him now. She had to keep going. "I've been working on a new project," she began, "something that could revolutionize the way your company approaches consumer engagement. A fresh angle, something your competitors won't see coming." The CEO leaned back in his chair, studying her intently. "And what makes you think this will interest me?" he asked, his tone still cautious but not as dismissive as before. Maria smiled, though she was fighting the urge to break into a nervous sweat. She had to keep her composure. She had to sell this idea to him. It was the only shot she had. Because it's not about what your company has been doing so far, she said. It's about what you could do next. It's about the next wave of consumers, those who aren't being reached by traditional methods. I've analyzed the market trends, and I can see a gap. A huge one. And I'm the one who can fill it. The CEO didn't react right away. He just sat there, watching her as she spoke. Maria could almost feel his mind working, ticking through her words, analyzing everything she said. And the silence, that silence that hung between them, was maddening. Every second felt like a lifetime. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, he spoke. Let's say you're right. Let's say your proposal has merit, he said, his voice suddenly more neutral. What's your plan? Maria felt a surge of hope. This was the breakthrough she had been waiting for. I've already done the groundwork, she said, pulling out a small notebook from her purse. I've outlined the entire strategy. How to leverage current trends, how to target the right demographic, and how to push past the competition. She handed the notebook over to him, her hands shaking just slightly. He took it from her without hesitation and flipped it open, scanning the pages with practiced eyes. Maria held her breath as he read through her notes. She could only watch as he flicked through the pages, his expression unreadable. She couldn't read him. Not now. Minutes passed, and the tension only seemed to grow. Maria's thoughts raced. Was he impressed? Was he going to throw her out of the room and call security? Or was this the moment when everything she'd worked for would finally come to fruition? Without looking up, he closed the notebook and set it down on the table in front of him. Interesting, he said, his voice calm but with a hint of something she couldn't quite place. You've certainly put a lot of work into this. Maria couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. I have, she replied, keeping her voice steady. I believe in it. I believe it could change everything. He leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped in front of him. I'll give you credit for one thing, Maria, he said, his gaze locking onto hers. You certainly know how to make an entrance. She felt her cheeks flush, but she didn't break eye contact. I'm not here to waste anyone's time, she said, her voice firm. I'm here because I believe I can help. He studied her for a long moment, his eyes piercing, as if searching for something more. I'll be honest with you, he said finally, his voice quieter now, I wasn't expecting much from you when you walked in here. But I can see that you have something to offer. I'll take your proposal under consideration. Maria's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't the full approval she had hoped for, but it was more than she had expected. She felt a sense of victory, of validation, for the first time in a long while. She had made an impact. He stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. I'll let you know in a few days, he said, his tone polite but final. Maria stood as well, still feeling the weight of the moment. She hadn't won yet, but she had certainly earned his attention. Thank you for your time, she said, trying to keep her composure intact. The CEO nodded, his eyes lingering on her for a moment longer than necessary. Don't make the mistake of thinking this is the end, he said cryptically, before turning toward the door. Maria watched him leave, her mind racing. What had he meant by that? Before she could process her thoughts, the security guard stepped forward. You're not supposed to be here, he said again, his tone firmer this time. Maria didn't answer. She was too lost in thought, too focused on what had just transpired. She had made it through the door. And now the real challenge began. The days following her meeting with the CEO felt like a blur. Maria hardly slept, her mind endlessly running through every word, every look exchanged in that room. She replayed the conversation over and over, dissecting it, trying to make sense of the CEO's cryptic parting words. Don't make the mistake of thinking this is the end. What did he mean? Did he intend to offer her a deal, or was he simply being polite? Maria had hoped for a solid answer that day, but now, in the quiet of her apartment, she realized she might not get one that easily. She couldn't afford to sit back and wait. If there was one thing she'd learned over the years, it was that nothing in life was handed to you. You had to go out and take it. The next morning, she found herself staring at her phone. Her inbox was full of emails, some from clients, others from colleagues, but none from the CEO or his office. No word. Nothing. She had sent a follow-up email the night before, just a polite reminder about her proposal, but even that hadn't been answered. Was it over? Was this the end of her chance? She fought against the creeping doubt trying to take root in her mind. It wasn't long before the phone rang, and the number on the screen was unfamiliar. Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't sure why, but she already had a sinking feeling. She picked up. Maria? Her stomach twisted. It was him. It was the CEO's voice, unmistakable. Yes, she replied, trying to keep the tremor out of her voice. This is Maria. Mr. Thompson here. I've had a chance to go over your proposal. He paused for a moment, and the silence felt thick, heavy. I've got some questions. Maria felt a surge of hope. She forced herself to stay calm, reminding herself that this was what she had been waiting for. Of course. I'm happy to answer any questions. He continued. Your proposal is intriguing, but there's something about it I can't quite place. It's too raw. Too much potential with too little substance. What exactly makes you think it will work? Maria's breath caught in her throat. Raw? Was he questioning her competence? Did he think she didn't know what she was talking about? The last thing she wanted was to appear unprepared or unprofessional. But she wouldn't let him see her panic. The potential is the substance, she said firmly. You're right that it's new. It's different. That's why it works. Consumers are tired of the same old tactics. They're looking for something that speaks to them on a deeper level. And that's where my proposal comes in. The silence stretched out again. Maria held her breath. Was he buying it? Finally, he spoke. I need to see it in action. I need proof. This thing you've outlined, it's not enough for me to take a risk. If you want to move forward, you need to show me it can work. Show me how this would look in a real-world scenario. If you do that, I'll consider it further. Maria's heart raced. Show him? Of course, that was the answer. She had to prove herself. Prove that her vision wasn't just an idea on paper but something tangible, something that could actually work. I understand, she said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts racing through her mind. I can put together a demo, something that shows exactly how it would work in practice. Give me a few days. There was a slight pause. I'll be waiting. Don't disappoint me, Maria. And with that, the line went dead. Her mind spun, the pressure mounting. She couldn't afford to fail now. Not after coming so far. This was her moment. She had to make it count. The next few days were a blur of activity. Maria was consumed by the task of putting together a presentation that would convince the CEO, and possibly the entire company, that her idea was more than just a concept. She spent hours researching, analyzing data, designing mock-ups, and creating a pitch that was compelling, professional, and, most importantly, convincing. She worked late into the night, barely eating, barely sleeping. The weight of her task felt suffocating, but she couldn't back down. There was no turning back now. As the days passed, Maria began to feel a gnawing sense of dread in the pit of her stomach. What if she wasn't good enough? What if all her hard work amounted to nothing? What if the CEO saw right through her, saw the desperate hope she was trying to hide beneath her confidence? She pushed those thoughts aside. She couldn't afford to let self-doubt take control. She had to stay focused. She had to prove to herself, as much as to anyone else, that she was capable of making this work. Finally, after days of preparation, Maria stood in front of a large conference room, holding her breath as she prepared to present her demo to the CEO. She had everything ready, the slides, the figures, the projected outcomes. It was all in place. But nothing could prepare her for the moment when she finally stood face to face with him again. The CEO sat at the head of the table, his sharp eyes scanning her as she entered. There was no warmth in his expression, only a cold professionalism. He didn't offer her a greeting, didn't even nod in acknowledgement. He simply gestured toward the screen and waited for her to begin. Maria's hands shook as she clicked through her slides, presenting her ideas, explaining how they would work, and providing data to back up her claims. As she spoke, she could feel his gaze on her, assessing, calculating, looking for flaws, waiting for her to slip. But she didn't. She kept her composure, kept her voice steady, kept her eyes on the prize. This was her moment. As the presentation came to an end, there was silence. No applause, no words of encouragement. Just the sound of the CEO shifting in his chair. He looked at her, his eyes calculating, unreadable. "Well?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. "What do you think?" For a moment, he didn't answer. He just sat there, his fingers steepled in front of his lips. Maria's pulse raced. Was it good? Was it terrible? The waiting was unbearable. Finally, he spoke. "I'll admit," he said slowly, his voice carrying an edge she couldn't quite place. "You've done something impressive here. But I still have doubts. I'm not convinced yet." Maria's heart sank. The words she'd been waiting to hear seemed so close, but they weren't the ones she had hoped for. "What do you mean?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the disappointment threatening to rise within her. The CEO's eyes locked onto hers. "I want to see how this works outside this boardroom. I want to see how it performs in real time, with real consumers, with real feedback. I'm giving you one chance, Maria." "One." She nodded, trying to suppress the mixture of frustration and determination that surged inside her. This wasn't the rejection she had feared, but it wasn't the approval she had hoped for either. "I'll take that opportunity," she said firmly. "And I won't let you down." Later that day, as she walked back to her apartment, Maria could barely believe what had just happened. She had a chance, one chance, to prove herself. The stakes were higher than ever, but she couldn't afford to lose. She would do whatever it took. The days leading up to the real-world test felt like a whirlwind. Maria worked with urgency, refining every detail of her plan, preparing for every potential outcome. She had the opportunity, now she had to seize it. There would be no room for mistakes. She wasn't just proving her idea to the CEO. She was proving herself to everyone who had ever doubted her, everyone who had ever told her she wasn't enough, that she didn't belong in this world. This was her moment. And she wasn't going to let it slip away. The deadline had arrived. The weight of it all hung heavy on Maria's shoulders as she stared at the clock ticking down in her office. A single slip-up, a single mistake, could undo everything she had worked for. Her mind buzzed with the potential outcomes, each more terrifying than the last. She had given everything she had to prove herself, to prove her idea, and to show that she could stand toe-to-toe with the industry giants. Her team had worked tirelessly, gathering data, adjusting the strategy, and refining every aspect of her proposal. They had done everything she asked of them, and more. Now, it was time for her to take the final step. Maria had thought she knew what this moment would feel like. She had pictured it in her head 1,000 times, presenting her ideas in front of the CEO, showing the data, the results, and ultimately sealing the deal. But the reality was different. It wasn't just the presentation anymore. It wasn't just about a job or a promotion. This was about something deeper. It was about proving to herself that she could do it, that she could take the risks, push beyond the boundaries, and rise above the odds. She had always been told she was too ambitious, too driven. People had warned her about pushing too hard, about reaching too far. But now, as she prepared to stand before the CEO once again, she realized that the real test wasn't about the idea or the strategy. It was about her own belief in herself. She had come so far, and there was no going back. The phone rang, breaking her reverie. She glanced at the screen. It was him. The CEO. Her heart skipped a beat. She took a deep breath, steadying herself before picking up. "Maria, we're ready," his voice was direct, almost cold. "Come to the conference room. We'll begin the evaluation in 30 minutes. She swallowed hard, nodding even though he couldn't see her. "I'll be there." As she gathered her materials and walked toward the conference room, her mind raced. She tried to calm her nerves, but the anticipation of what was to come was almost overwhelming. Her plan had been set into motion. This was her last chance. If she failed now, all her hard work would be for nothing. She arrived at the room to find the CEO already seated at the head of the table, flanked by several members of his team. Their expressions were unreadable, their eyes sharp as they assessed her every movement. Maria had faced tough crowds before, but this was different. This wasn't just about impressing a group of colleagues or clients. This was about her future, her dreams, everything she had worked so hard to build. "Maria, sit down," the CEO's voice broke the silence. "Let's get started." She took a seat at the table, setting her materials in front of her. For a moment, the room felt suffocating. The silence seemed to stretch on forever. The pressure was unbearable. The CEO leaned forward, studying her with an intensity that made her uneasy. "I've seen your proposal. We've seen the results. But I want to hear it from you, Maria. I want to know why I should invest in this. Why should I take the risk?" Her pulse quickened. This was it. The moment that would define everything. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and met his gaze. "Because what I'm offering isn't just a business solution. It's a way forward. It's an opportunity to change the way we think, the way we operate, and the way we connect with consumers. It's not about playing it safe, it's about pushing boundaries, breaking free of the mold, and offering something that people actually want, something they crave. I know the data, I've seen the trends, and this is what the market is asking for." The room remained silent. Her words hung in the air, each one carefully measured, each one a calculated risk. She couldn't afford to falter now. The CEO's eyes didn't leave hers, his expression unreadable. "And if it fails?" Maria felt a knot tighten in her stomach, but she didn't back down. "If it fails, then I'll accept responsibility. But I won't let it fail. I've built a plan that has real potential, a plan that can transform this company. You've got nothing to lose and everything to gain." She took a breath, watching for any reaction from the others in the room. The silence that followed was excruciating. Finally, the CEO leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers against the table. "You've made your case, Maria. But now, I want to see how it works in real time. If you can deliver the results, then we'll talk. Until then, I'm not ready to commit." Maria's heart sank, but she didn't let it show. She had anticipated this. The CEO wasn't going to make things easy for her. He never did. She nodded, keeping her voice steady. "I understand. But I'll deliver." The next few days were a whirlwind of preparation. Maria's team was fully invested, and she could see how much they believed in her. They all had the same fire in their eyes, the same determination to prove themselves. But the fear, the pressure, it never went away. Every moment was a reminder of what was at stake. She had to make this work. As the day of the test approached, Maria found herself staying up late, reviewing the data, analyzing the strategy, and double-checking every aspect of the plan. There were no second chances. Then came the morning of the big day. The demo was set, and the CEO had agreed to attend. Maria stood in front of the screen, her nerves on edge as she prepared to showcase everything she had worked so hard for. One by one, the team members arrived, taking their seats. The CEO was the last to walk in, his usual air of authority filling the room as he made his way to the head of the table. His eyes scanned the room briefly before resting on Maria. "Let's see what you've got," he said flatly. Her hands shook as she clicked through her slides, presenting her data, showcasing the strategy, and finally unveiling the demo. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she was in control. The ideas flowed naturally, the words came easily. She had never been more confident in her life. As the demo played out, the room watched in complete silence. No one spoke. No one moved. Every eye was on the screen, absorbing the results, the predictions, the success of it all. Finally, the demo concluded. There was a long pause before the CEO spoke. "Well," he said slowly, "I have to admit, Maria. This is impressive." Maria's heart skipped a beat, but she couldn't let herself get too excited just yet. "You're saying it works?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The CEO's gaze locked with hers. "It works. But I'm still not ready to give you everything. I'll need more time to consider. More data. More proof." The room fell into silence again, and for a brief moment, Maria thought she might collapse. It was a win, but it wasn't a complete win. The battle wasn't over. As the CEO stood to leave, he turned to her, his voice softening for the first time since their meeting began. "You're close, Maria. Don't stop now." Her pulse raced as she stood up to shake his hand. This wasn't the end, but it was a step forward, a big one. She had shown him what she was capable of. And that, in itself, was a victory. As she watched him leave the room, Maria took a deep breath. It wasn't over yet, but she had made it this far. No matter the outcome, she had proven that she was capable. And for the first time in her life, she knew she could go even further.